Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. Massimo Di Gioacchino visited us at the Calandra Institute to discuss his research on the religious history of Italian Catholic immigrants in the United States from 1876 to 1921. A historian specializing in the late modern transatlantic world, Massimo Di Gioacchino served as the Tiro A Segno visiting professor in Italian-American Studies at NYU during the fall of 2022. His primary research focuses on the movement of people and ideas between Europe and the United States from 1776 to 1945, particularly examining Italian immigration to the U.S. and the role of American Protestant missions in Italy. Massimo, welcome to Italics.
Thank you.
And welcome to the Calandra Institute.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
So your lecture is for a new religious history of Italian Catholic immigrants in the United States. There was what some scholars called the Italian problem, right? With the Italians versus the Catholic Church. Talk to us a little bit about that.
The religious condition of Italian immigrants in the late 19th century, early 20th century was considered by many people at the time within and outside the Catholic Church to be both a scandal and a problem. What was the scandal? What was the problem? On the one hand, the scandal seemed to be the devotion of the Italian immigrants, which was very far from the dominant Catholic devotion within the American Church, mostly of Irish descent. But there was definitely something more. Italians did not attend church, did not go to Mass, did not send their kids to parochial schools, did not contribute financially to churches. And so sources of the late 19th century, both, again, journalists, but even the encyclical of Leo XIII, described the Italian immigrants, the Catholic immigrants, as abandoned to themselves, as totally neglected by their churches and priests, morally deteriorated, and the fear was they could lose their soul. And so this is what, especially the historiography later, will call the Italian problem, the Italian religious state, the Italian problem for the church. I actually prefer the term Italian religious question, but all of these terms refer to the same situation. So scholars, when they started trying to understand the religious history of Italian Catholic immigrants, they always understood that the starting point to understand the Italian religious history was to decode, to decipher this. As I said, this was both a scandal and a problem, and this is what we call the Italian problem.
So now your research is basically late 19th, early 20th century.
Yeah, the period I focus on is classic period of the Italian Great Migration. So the common dates periodization is 1876, 1921. But I've actually also been researching on the period before mass migration, so 1850s, 1860s.
In Italy.
In Italy and also in America.
Europe.
For example, we have the first Italian chapel in America was St. Mary Magdalene the Paz in Philadelphia, and it is 1853. Italian presence in America predates the beginning of the Great Migration, and so Italians already have developed their own their religious life. And my work has been trying to take advantage, to do good use of all the sources that were in the present in several archives, mostly Vatican Archives in Rome, but also the archives of the Archdiocese of New York were not very much used by previous scholars to take advantage, to do research on that material, those archives, in order to broaden our understanding of the religious history of Italian immigrants in America, and sometimes to rewrite it.
I was going to ask you, so the fact that these archives are now open, they weren't open before, now they're open, so there's going to be some rewriting of the history because we're going to discover things that we didn't know about.
Yes, and really my work has been, and it is still this, to be able to build a broader, more accurate narrative of what we know, based more on the archival documentation and less on the biased, very ideological voices, sources that we had at the time of the Italian Great Migrations. And so I've been working extensively on what used to be known as the Vatican Secret Archive. Right. Now it is known as the Vatican Apostolic Archive, the Archives of Propaganda Fide, which was the Roman congregation, so the branch of the Holy See that supervised the American Church until 1908, Vatican Apostolic Library. So Italian scholars have been started using this dossier. There is a lot of material. Been using them since the 1990s. But my work, and especially the upcoming monograph, which will come out next year, will try probably for the first time to build a new, different narrative of Italian religious life, less based on the devotion of the immigrants, which has been the obsession of previous historiography, also for good reasons. But the obsession less on what Italians believed and more on their ecclesiastical life, which means more on how really Italians lived, experienced life in the church. It will be very much more a political history. This is what I think we have been lacking so far. Our understanding of the religious life of Italian immigrants today, including the understanding of that problem and that scandal, that problem and the scandal of their condition at the time, is very much the result of the scholarship produced in the 1960s and 1970s by two very famous and fundamental scholars, Rudolf Vecoli and Silvano Tommasi. Both of them have traced in their scholarship the scandal of the religious life of the Italian immigrants to their practice of a supposed popular, pagan, magical devotion, which the Italian immigrants would had with them in Italy and eventually brought with them to the United States. And this devotion would have provoked in the United States, especially by American Catholics, mostly Irish, but also American Protestants, a scandal. This devotion would have been the scandal, the source of the scandal. But they also tried to explain the problem of the condition of the Italian immigrants as the result of an historical clash of this popular pagan magical devotion with the urban industrialized devotion of American Catholics, mostly Irish, but also German, French. This clash would have been the cause of the condition of Italian immigrants. On the one hand, Italian immigrants would have not found themselves welcome and would have not been able to assimilate in a church life so far, so distant from their own. And at the same time, American Catholics would have not assisted them, helped them, because they would have not recognized in these new Catholics, arriving mostly from southern Italy, fellow Catholics.
One more question, and it's going to seem like a banal question. Among Italians, among the immigrants, do you see a difference due to geography, north, south? Is there a difference in the profundity of their practice?
There is definitely a different kind of, we can say, of devotion, but also of church dynamics in the south of Italy and the northern Italy of the time. And Italian immigrants bring this with them. For example, Italian Catholic communities were coming from Lucca, Genova, Padova, from the north of Italy, tended to be more organized, tended to be more respectful of church laws. Southern devotion was in very much a more public devotion, a more emotional devotion, because devotion is also, again, is very intimate, very private. So it was instead a more manifested devotion.
And does that mean for example, the sort of wailing at funerals and things like that? Is that
yes,
what
it meant the way processions were organized, funerals were organized. But what really made the difference in Italy and in America at the time was that the church in the South was desperately poor. And this was very much due also to some policies that the Italian government had enforced after 1861, 1870, for the way the Italian liberal government in late 19th century seized and reorganized church property. It very much hit the church in the South more than in the North. And so when Italian communities from the South emigrated, they left an impoverished church A church was a drop of vocations.
Yeah.
And so when American Catholics in the late 19th century or 20th century criticized the Italian immigrants, they especially criticized the Southerners. Religiosity seemed to be chaotic, seemed to be erratic, but it was not necessarily their devotion. It was because they hadn't experienced a healthy, properly established, enforced church life. They were sons and daughters of the collapse of the church, and they brought that feeling with them to the United States, where instead many of the French, German, and Irish communities sometimes were instead very healthy, financially stable churches with the proper priests, properly trained, with a large participation, several confraternities who would follow the orders of the priest, who would be in touch with the bishop. This was what we call canonical church life.
Yeah. So it's more complicated, right? Because
it is.
The church is really at this time run by the Irish. The Irish are already established. They're the hegemony, right, of Catholicism in the United States. But it's also true that Italians, even in Italy, didn't practice the way the Irish wanted them to practice. They were religious, they believed, but they didn't go to church regularly.
Yes, so a church affiliation and religious affiliation at this time can mean different things.
Right.
There is no doubt, as you were suggesting, that church attendance in Italy, more in general in Europe, after the French Revolution and throughout the 19th century, declined. Still, even though they didn't go to church, they didn't enjoy the company of priests as much as the hierarchies wanted, Italians still carried with them a deep Catholic culture, which did not necessarily imply, as I was suggesting, practice,
right,
but still inform their lives. And this, as you were saying, Anthony, this religious culture was very much different to the Irish one. This is what American historians have always noticed, and what Americans noticed at the time. The Italian devotion seemed to be very bizarre, very strange, very irregular. Still, that devotion has always been in place in Italy for centuries.
Right.
So it was irregular to American Catholics, but it was not very much irregular to the Holy See, to the Pope. So I should say the Irish standard seemed to be the standard in America, but this was not actually the standard worldwide.
Right, right. You know, it's important for us to make that distinction because it has nothing to do with the profound belief that an Italian may have. He or she just might not like to go to church, to that church, whatever. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there were two churches, right? There was the church, that is the symbol of Catholicism. Then there was the church run by the priests. That wasn't always looked upon in a good light, correct?
You mean the local parishes?
Yes, right.
Yes. Truth is that what the research in archives in the last 10 years, archives that previous historians did not sometimes have the chance to look because they've been closed.
These are Vatican Archives?
Vatican Archives. Yeah. We should consider that until 1985, Vatican Archives have been closed for the pontificates of Pius X, Benedict XV, so for much of the period of the Italian Great Migration, if I'm not wrong, 1902, 1904, 1922. So the big scholarship on the religious life of Italian immigrants was produced, these archives were closed. So what recent research that I also had the pleasure to conduct showed was indeed that it was not only that Italian immigrants did not participate into religious life, it was not only a quantitative problem, it was a qualitative problem. So the ecclesiastical life of Italian immigrants in the US somehow very much was distant to the prescriptions, the norm of the church. In 1985, Pope John Paul II finally opened the Vatican Archives to historians for the periods relative to the papacies of Pope Pius X, 1903-1914, and Pope Benedict XV, 1914, February 1922. So after the end of the Great Italian Migration, so after the end of the first major phase of Italian migration, which, as I said, had ended the year before, 1921, with the first Quota Act of US Congress, Truth is, there is a second Quota Act 1924. At this point, Italians do not arrive anymore. Scholars had then the possibility to carry out their historical operation on sources, on archival sources, that until then had been impossible. I would love to present to you 3 documents that I've been using and I think really give a sense of this operation. So the first document is a relazione, so a report by Giovanni Battista Franzelin, who was the emissary of the Pope to the United States, to the American Church. So was sent by Pope Leo XIII to the United States to produce a report about the situation, the condition of the American Catholic Church. And he produced this report in 1883, the year before the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore, where American bishops were supposed to discuss and make decisions about the well-being of the Italian immigrants. They had to make decisions. And this report indeed was sent to Rome, because Rome wanted to direct the meetings of the Plenary Council, and Franzelin will also produce a relazione, another report after. And in this report, Franzelin describes, underlines, the document in the Vatican Archives has a note written on the top right. Document says riservatissima, 3 quotation marks, 3 exclamation marks, because it was a very private reserved document, because American bishops did not have to see it, because it was really an evaluation of their work. And here he highlights the fact that the Holy See was not aware of what was happening in America, because American bishops did not share information about their own dioceses to Rome, because they didn't want to have Roman interference. And the American bishops did not did not enforce their decisions of Rome when they considered them to be contrary to their own agenda, which explains the problem of the lack of assistance towards the Italian immigrants. Scholars have been asking why nobody was taking care of them, why there was no coordination between Rome, the Italian bishops, and American bishops.
And where does language play? The Italians not knowing English or knowing English not that well, and the Irish instead being the dominant. They're already dominant because they came here first, number one. And number 2, they're native English.
Of course. It plays a huge role, of course. I would say probably as in every aspect of Italian life at the time. It's probably one of the markers of the differences between Italian immigrant life and Italian American life.
Yeah.
If you know English or don't know it, it makes a whole difference.
Right.
Definitely one of the reasons why Italian immigrants couldn't relate with other Catholic churches in New York, other priests, was because they couldn't speak English, couldn't understand their other faithful. So another Catholic, Irish Catholic, who could and perhaps wanted to help them, but they couldn't get communicate with each other, and so it formed it on so many levels. But as I was saying, it was not. It was just part of the problem. There were deeper political questions behind the lack of participation of the Italians, the quality of the priests. And that history has so much more to tell than just the simple description that we have from previous historiography of Italians as popular pagans Catholic. So there was really a political dimension at the local parish that we did not used to know until recently.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, some of the cultural representations, right? Both novel and film. The church as a man-made structure is seen very poorly, right? The priest is basically a moocher. He's going out, right, asking the parishioners for things and things of that sort, and so we had that manifestation or that characterization of the church in some of the early 20th century or mid-20th century novels and maybe films as well.
Yes. It is true that even in Italy, after the unification, 1861, after fall of the Papal States, the end of the temporal power of the Pope, and the seize of much of church property in Rome by the liberal state, there is no doubt that the church has experienced a period of crisis, of especially economic, financial decline, and that resulted in low-quality parish religious life. Again, becoming priest did not mean anymore in Italy having access to certain privileges.
Right.
And so we see a lower quality of priests also in Italy and of church life. So there is a denunciation about this in Italy as well.
Yeah.
What's the difference though is that in Italy still the church had a network of resources. It had a primacy in the villages in the south that it kept having. In America, the church did not have all of this. And so that desperate situation that already exists in Italy, in America accentuated even more. And it produced what I was mentioning, this emergence of illicit, irregular behaviors that we could perhaps find in Italy, but not as much as in Italian Catholic communities in America, because the Italian church in America was really, really poor. Bishop Corrigan makes a list of the 15 Italian priests present in New York at the time. A very precious list, because we have been always knowing that the Italians lacked priests, that the quality of priests was not always great. There were some sources, some vague documents, vague statements about this, but we didn't know much more. In this document, he makes a list of the 15 Italian priests in New York, which meant the majority of priests in America. And he made a report about their work with Italian immigrants and also who they were. He noted, for example, that Father Pietro of the Diocese of Tiro A, again, there is a list and there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the dioceses from where they came from, so mostly Sicily, Basilicata, Campania, Avellino. Father Pietro of the Diocese of Tricarico had left, quote, to enjoy, as some believe, the company of a girl, end quote. Father Costanzo of the Archdiocese of Gaeta, quote, took a pregnant woman with whom he maintained iniquitous tryst, there with him, end quote. Domenico Vento, also from Gaeta, quote, brought to America the woman with whom he held sacrilegious dealings here, end quote. But the accusations were not limited to concubinage, so having affairs, but also included that of denying, quote, fundamental points of faith, end quote, or being the object of, quote, very grave accusations in matter of honesty, end quote, such as Father Guglielmo of Tricarico. Father Rocco of Messina was accused of living a, quote, very bad life with regard to morals and being a blasphemer and a card player, end quote. Some, like Father Vincenzo of Cerreto, had been subject to suspension multiple times in Italy, actually. Father Frangena was known for, quote, drunkenness and dishonesty, end quote. And even after a few attempts at correction, he, quote, went back to being the way he was before, so that we came to believe that he was incorrigible, end quote. Finally, Corrigan importantly noted, quoting him, all the above, and among 15 priests, 13 of them presented severe accusations about conduct and many other things. And so Corrigan wrote, quote, all the above, except the last, had good and proper letter of recommendations, end quote. And here's the third and last document. I was mentioning what we can call lay activism, the fact that these poor, uneducated, these contadini who have always been described as victims, uprooted, unable to uplift themselves, seem to be actually to push forward their own agenda. And so Richard Giuliani, in his famous book, Priest, Parish and People, about Philadelphia, he was able, because he had consulted the archives of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, to describe some peculiar, illicit, irregular activities of the Italian confraternity, especially of St. Mary Magdalene and Pazzi. In 1876, protested the naming by Bishop Wood of Philadelphia of a certain priest, which was Gaetano Sorrentini. And in order to contest the bishop's naming of this priest, the election of this priest, they summoned up all the Italian immigrants of Philadelphia, called an election, and voted democratically to elect their own priest, something Catholics cannot do even after Vatican II. But they did it in 1876. And they came to conflict with the bishop, even changing the locks of the door of the church, so that the Bishop Wood was obliged to reach out to Propaganda Fide and to call out the conduct of these confraternities. And we have the petition sent by the Confraternità di Santa Maria Maddalena Pazzi of 1867 sent to Propaganda Fide to claim their own reasons. We have been mistreated, we need our own priest, we have elected it, but if the bishop acknowledges him, we are happy to receive him. Of course, you have elected him, and so you just... What is interesting here, that this situation which Richard Giuliani had already, he was aware of, in this new understanding with this new documentation, finds a new, better, more complete sense. The political life of the Italian immigrants in the churches, the way they organize, the way they're related to the priests, to the bishops. The archives of Vatican Archives in Rome are full of denunciations against Italians and their practices. And we didn't know this. We didn't know this 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
So these things we're finding out now.
Have been finding and are really the documents, the new understandings that are informing my research. And there are some notable documents that show up this story.
This is all fascinating, and we can continue. But I want to thank you for taking time out.
Anthony, thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored.
You've got this book coming out, and we're looking forward to seeing it. And we'll see you around. We're going to be around. We're all around. We're all around here in New York. Thank you. Thanks for watching this episode of Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.